Today's iOS coding tip is about mocks and how to create mocks in your unit tests. So essentially the idea is you want to have, let's say you have a service such as, let's say, IEX service that injects some kind of a client object that it depends on and that implements a certain protocol. Then that gives you the ability to switch things up at the runtime when specifically here when this get price method is called on the injected object. Since it's a protocol at runtime in your unit test, that could be some other protocol, and specifically it could be a mock for you to assert that the get price method was actually called, right? So what you do then, you have this protocol that you create for the thing you're injecting, right? And currently it only has one method, and this is supposed to be the actual implementation of the client object, but currently it's a work in progress code base, so currently it just returns some stubbed value. But our service currently already relies on that client object and then interface, and it is injected. So what you're doing in your unit test, you are creating your service, the system under test, and then you are calling a method, and you want to assert the side effect that the injected client mock, injected right here, that a certain method on it was called only once, right? Or at least once. So what you're doing is you want to create a client mock object. And the way to do it is you create a new class that adopts that protocol, that interface, and actually implements the method, right? But instead of doing actual work, what it does, it either returns a dummy value or it returns a value from a past handler, but it always counts. It has a variable with a counter of 0 in the beginning by default, and then every time in your unit tests when this mocks get price method gets called, the counter increases. So that way here, when you create your service, this thing you're actually testing, and you run that method that's supposed to have a side effect of calling this client interface's get price method, you get it's counted. So you can then later assert that it was called. And but if you don't want to only have a default value as in your mock method, but you want to return some other value depending on your case of your unit test, what you can do, you can create a handler for that method, handler block that you pass into that mock, and if it's present, then it will be executed and whatever value was in that block will be returned. So here in our test, besides just testing that the method was called, so here in our unit test, besides testing that the method was actually called as a side effect, we also want to, we are asserting on the result of that method call, but we want to make sure that the result's actually correct and was used at the end. So we pass a handler block to our mock object to be used whenever the system under test calls that get price method. And that's what you see above here, right? If that handler is present, that's an optional closure, then it gets executed. Effectively, that what it does, This mimics the actual behavior that will eventually be implemented here in the actual implementation of that client class. And this is how, and then here in your service, in our service, right, we do call it. So this is how you create a proper mock object. And the reason it's actually correct in this case to call it mock, because it's actually, we are asserting on it. It's not as, otherwise it would have been just a stub. But since we're asserting that something was called, a method was called on it once, then it becomes a mock.